So we've come quite a long way since the beginning of this chapter. We've built out an entire form and we've added so many features. We've discussed smart containers, dumb components, input bindings, validation, styling, our invalid, safety checking, triggering validation, and so much more. So it's at this point that we want to, when we fire our submit handler, we want to then do something and then pass the data up. Once our form has captured all that information from our user, we need to then pass it up to the next level. So if we jump in our donut single, we have the donut form. So this is the exact point where we want to grab that data. Now, because we are dealing with a create button, we're actually going to listen for a create event. What I want to do before we do this, where we have this submit event and further down on our buttons, we have a click event. In the same way we use this syntax, we can listen to an event from our component. Once our component is encapsulated, because if you look at this one line of code, we don't care about what's happening inside. We've set up the form. It's pretty bulletproof. It shows the user working indicators, resets, validation, and all of that is happening. Whereas our smart component, it doesn't really care about what this dumb component's doing. And it shouldn't really. All the smart component cares about is giving the data and getting the data. So we're going to work out how to give the data soon. But how do we get the data out of the form? Because at the moment, our form is essentially allowing us to create new items where we have our object definition. We can press create, but we don't have the ability to take an existing item and then pass it down to the form, which of course we're going to learn how to do. So what we essentially want to do is listen to an event. We're going to call this the create event. Angular is essentially allowing us to create our own events and add them to our components. Now for this, we're going to call this the onCreate event. And yes, we are going to request our $event because this is Angular's special object, which is going to give us whatever is passed up via an event. And this will make more sense as we continue, but let's take our onCreate. And underneath our onInit, we are essentially being given a donut. Of course we are, because that is what our form is set up to do. So here I'm going to type it as donut of type donut, and I've hit enter, so it's going to then go and automatically import our donut type from our model file. But essentially this is the definition. We have name, icon, price, promo, description, and all of those exist on our donut model, which is then going to allow us to use those properties and get some of the benefits that TypeScript can give us. So here we can say console.log, and we can just simply add onCreate, comma, and then donut. So what this will allow us to do is pass the information up to our parent component. Now when we save things out, we're going to see all of these different errors because we have this create, onCreate, and this $event, which it says argument of type event is not assignable. By default, TypeScript and Angular are trying to think it's something else, so we need to now go and implement this create event and let Angular know what our event looks like. So if we jump into our donut form, at the top we have our component. Now I want you to import two things. First, we're going to import this thing called an output, and we're also going to import this thing called an event emitter. In the same way that we learned about inputs, where we have our donut card, we imported our input, and that allowed us to specify a property that we can bind to and pass data into a component. The output is exactly the same, but the opposite. So let's go down and create a property called create. And in the same way we used @input, here we're going to use @output and just simply mark that create property as an output. Now for us to pass an event up to our parent component, we need to create a new event emitter and simply call this function. By default, this is going to have an implicit type of any. So we need to now tell Angular and TypeScript that we are in fact emitting a type of donut. And this is some slightly advanced TypeScript. So here we can say new event emitter, and the type of event that we are going to emit is in fact a donut. Now I've hit enter, which has then imported my donut model. So make sure you do have this available as well. But essentially we have our event emitter, and when we hover over this, we can then see it has a type of event emitter donut. We could, if we wanted to, go and type this explicitly, and explicit means that we are typing out event emitter of type donut, but because we are specifying quite a simple new event emitter with the donut as the generic type argument, we can then hover over our create and we can see the type wherever we use it. So now if we go back to our donut single, we do not see this error because our $event, which is then heavily tied to Angular's event emitter, knows that it's expecting a donut to be passed back up to our component. So in reality, we didn't really need to add the type here because it's going to get picked up. However, it has an implicit any type, which we don't really want to rely on. So it's nice to then keep typing our events function arguments as we go to get the most power out of our TypeScript. So with this in mind, we can jump back into our donut form. We've essentially set up a property that we can bind to. We can listen to an event on the create property. We're using these event brackets. We've got a callback ready to expect this $event. Our $event is then specified by what we are passing up in here. So this is the way that we can tell Angular the type of event that's coming up. So now we need to simply use it. We need to fire that event upwards with the data. Now you can see here we have this handle submit. So once all these checks have passed, we have either marked all as touched or we have a completely valid form value. So instead of us just doing a simple console log, we're going to say this.create, and we just simply want to call emit with our form value. So let's save this out. We then see our application reload. We can bring up our DevTools console. We'll jump into name. We can add testing, select an icon, add a price. We can select a promo just for fun. We can say text here, ... hit our create button. And you can see that this has come from the onCreate from our donut-single component. So our form is essentially encapsulating all of its behavior. And when it's fulfilled its duty, when it's finished its role, we then get given it in one simple line of code where we are just logging it out in the parent. This division between smart container and dumb components is becoming even clearer because it's now our smart component's duty to go off to the back end and save that piece of data in the database. And guess what? When we refresh this application, it's the smart component's duty to then go and get the data again and then pass it down to the form if the data, of course, exists. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I think this is a really nice way to demonstrate the flow of data and the roles of our components in our application. With this in mind, let's carry on and finish off our form.